There is a forest on the eastern coast of England where the pines grow so close together that even in daylight, the paths between them are dim. The trees are old. The roots are deep. The ground beneath them has been cold and quiet for centuries. And in December of 1980, in the small hours of a winter morning, something moved through that forest that no one has ever fully explained. The forest is called Rendlesham. This is a story about lights. About 3 nights in late December when soldiers from 2 NATO air bases, men trained to be skeptical, men trained to report accurately, walked into the trees and saw something that did not belong there. About the notes they took, the recordings they made, the memos that were written, classified, and then, decades later, quietly released. About what was said, what was denied, and what has never been explained. We are going to go slowly. There is no rush. There is nowhere to be. Outside, if you are listening in the dark, the world is doing what it always does, turning slowly, quietly, on its axis. And somewhere, tonight, the forest at Rendlesham is the same as it has always been. Cool. Dark. Patient. To understand what happened in that forest, we have to begin not with lights or landings, but with geography. With the shape of the land and the weight of history that had settled into it. The Suffolk coast of England is flat and wide and exposed to the North Sea. It is not dramatic country, no mountains, no wild moors, no great rivers. It is the kind of landscape that asks you to look at the sky, because the land itself offers so little interruption. For thousands of years, people have lived along this coast. The Romans came here. The Anglo-Saxons buried their kings here, the famous ship burial at Sutton Hoo, where an entire longship was covered with earth and silence, lies only a few miles from where our story takes place. The sea has always been close. The wind has always been present. And the light, on certain evenings, does strange things over the flat fields and the dark water. In 1942, the Royal Air Force established a base in this part of Suffolk, a place called Bentwaters. And beside it, a second base, Woodbridge. Both sat at the edge of Rendlesham Forest, a plantation of Corsican pine trees that stretched for several square miles between the bases and the coast. After the Second World War, these bases became part of the NATO alliance. American forces took up residence. For decades, during the Cold War, US Air Force personnel lived and worked in this quiet corner of England, watching the sky for threats that never came, or that, on one particular set of nights in December 1980, came in a form no one had anticipated. The winter of 1980 was cold and still. Christmas was a few days away. The base was operating on reduced personnel. Many people had gone home for the holidays. The forest was quiet. The sky was clear. And in the early hours of the 26th of December, the day after Christmas, the first call came in. Airman First Class John Burrows was on patrol near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge. His shift partner, Airman Edward Cabansag, was with him. And somewhere in the forest ahead of them, beyond the perimeter fence, they could see lights. Colored lights. Moving. Between the trees. Their first thought was ordinary enough. A plane had gone down. Some small aircraft, perhaps, had crashed in the forest. The lights could be wreckage, fuel burning, emergency beacons, the glow of something that had fallen from the sky. Burrows called it in. Permission was granted to investigate. And so, in the middle of the night, 2 airmen walked toward the light. What happened next has been described many times over the years, in official reports, in interviews, in books, in congressional briefings. But there is a quality to the original accounts, told close to the moment, before memory had time to reshape them, that is worth dwelling on. Burroughs later described the lights as multicolored, red, blue, white, and not behaving the way crashed wreckage behaves. They were not stationary. They moved. And they moved, he said, with a kind of deliberateness, as though whatever was producing them had some awareness of where it was going. Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston was contacted by radio and drove out to the East Gate. He was the senior NCO on duty. His job was to assess the situation, report, and bring order to whatever was happening. He did not bring order. What he found, when he reached the edge of the forest, was something that fell outside the categories he had been trained to apply. The lights were still visible. The trees were illuminated from within, or from below, or from somewhere that did not correspond to any obvious source. There was a mist low to the ground, the kind of winter mist common in that part of England. And in the mist, between the pines, something was there that was not a plane, not a helicopter, not wreckage. Peniston said it was a craft. A craft. Triangular in shape. About 3 meters across at the base, 2 meters tall. Dark metallic surface. Warm to the touch, he reached out and touched it. Covered, he said, in symbols. Raised symbols, like hieroglyphs, etched or embossed into the hull. He took notes. He sketched the symbols in his notebook. He walked around the object. He later said it felt ancient, and he knew that made no logical sense, but that was the word that came to him. Ancient. For roughly 45 minutes, he was near it. And then the lights intensified. The object lifted, not violently, not with any sound he could later describe clearly, and moved up through the trees and was gone. The forest went dark. The mist remained. The 3 men stood in the cold. There were indentations in the ground where the object had rested. 3 of them, in a triangular pattern, pressed into the soft earth of the forest floor. The trees nearby showed scorch marks, not deep burns, but a browning of the bark on the sides facing the clearing. Radiation levels, measured the following day, were found to be elevated, not dangerous, but measurably above background. The physical evidence was real. It was recorded. It was submitted in official reports. And then the morning came, as mornings do, and the men went back to their duties, and the forest was quiet again. But the forest was not done. There would be 2 more nights. Before we go further, I want to pause here and ask you to notice something. Not about the incident, but about the feeling of it. There is a particular quality to events that resist ordinary explanation. A stillness they leave behind. Not terror, exactly, though some of the men who were there have described something like fear. Not wonder, exactly, though wonder is part of it. Something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of something large and dark and not knowing where the bottom is. The men who walked into Rendlesham Forest that night were not dreamers or fantasists. They were military personnel, trained in observation, trained in skepticism, trained to apply Occam's razor to ambiguous situations. And they came back from that forest changed. Not dramatically. Not with wild eyes and trembling hands. But changed in the way that people are changed when something refuses to fit into the shape they have been given for the world. John Burroughs spent decades afterward trying to understand what he had seen. He became, in time, one of the most measured and careful voices in any discussion of the incident, cautious about claims, insistent on evidence, but equally insistent that something had happened. Something real. Something physical. Something that left marks on the Earth and elevated the radiation readings and did not go away simply because no one had a name for it. Jim Penniston, in his notebook, had drawn the symbols he said he saw on the hull of the object. He kept that notebook. Over the years, those drawings became one of the most discussed pieces of physical evidence in the entire case, not because they proved anything, but because they were made in the field, in the cold, by a trained military observer, in the minutes after contact. Whatever he saw, he drew what he thought he saw. And what he drew does not correspond to any known aircraft, any known technology, any known script. Let the forest be quiet for a moment. Let the pines stand in their dark rows. Let the mist settle low over the roots. The first night was over. But the strange thing, the thing that elevates this story above so many others of its kind, is that the first night was not the most remarkable one. The most remarkable night came later. Sleep is a strange country. We visit it every night, all of us, and we remember almost nothing of what happens there. We wake in the same bodies we fell asleep in the same rooms, with the same sounds outside the window, and yet something has passed through us in the dark. Some process has occurred that we do not understand, cannot observe, and cannot fully account for. The scientists who study sleep describe it in terms of waves, the brain moving through cycles, descending and rising, descending and rising. But the words they use, deep sleep, REM, slow wave, are maps of a territory that remains, in its essence, unknown. We spend a third of our lives in that territory. And we cannot tell you what happens there. There is something in that, perhaps, that makes stories like this one easier to hold. The world is full of things we cannot explain. The mind is full of things we cannot observe. And maybe, in the space between what we know and what we do not, there is room enough for a forest that glowed one December night, and a craft that left marks in the earth, and 3 men who came back from the trees carrying something they could not name. Rest now, if you are drifting. We will return to the forest when you are ready. It will still be there. It has always been there. The pines stand in their rows. The mist lies low. The sky above Suffolk is deep and cold and full of stars. Sleep. 2 nights passed. December the 27th and 28th came and went. The base returned to its routines. Reports were filed. Officers asked questions. The men who had been in the forest were debriefed, in the informal way that such things were sometimes handled in 1980, without the weight that would later be placed on their accounts. And then, on the night of the 28th of December, it happened again. This time, the response was more organized. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt was the deputy base commander at RAF Bentwaters. He was, by all accounts, a practical man. A career officer. Not someone given to fantasy or loose reporting. When word came to him on the night of the 28th that the lights were back, that something was happening again in the forest, he made a decision that would, decades later, define his legacy. He went to see for himself. Holt assembled a small team and went into Rendlesham Forest. He brought equipment, a Geiger counter to measure radiation, night vision devices, a starlight scope. And he brought a small handheld tape recorder. He pressed record. What was captured on that tape is, in many ways, the most significant document in the entire history of the Rendlesham incident. Not because it proves anything definitive. Not because it answers the central question of what, exactly, was in that forest. But because it is real time. Unmediated. The voice of a deputy base commander, walking through the trees at 2 in the morning, describing what he sees as he sees it, with the steady cadence of a man trying very hard to remain professional in the face of something that is making that difficult. The recording was released to the public in the 1980s, after an investigator obtained it through a Freedom of Information request. It lasts about 18 minutes. It has been analyzed many times, by many people. It sounds like this. Holt is calm, at first. He describes the radiation readings, above normal at the landing site from the first night. The indentations in the earth are still there. He notes the direction of the scorch marks on the trees. Then the lights appear. On the recording, you can hear the change in his voice. Not panic, he is too controlled for panic, but a tightening. A note of something that is not quite disbelief, because what he is looking at does not permit disbelief. He describes a light moving through the trees. A pulsing light. Reddish at its core, yellowish around the edges. It seems to move with awareness, not drifting, not falling, not moving randomly, but moving as though it knows where it is going. Then it breaks apart. The light, or the object producing the light, fragments into multiple pieces. The pieces scatter across the sky over the forest. And what was one becomes 5 or 6, moving independently, circling, hovering, then moving again. Holt's team watches. The Geiger counter makes its sounds. The starlight scope tracks the movements. And Holt, steady as he can manage, keeps speaking into the recorder. At one point, one of the lights stops, hovers over the field at the edge of the forest. And then, according to Holt, according to multiple witnesses standing in that field, it sends beams of light down to the ground. Not broadly. Not in a floodlight fashion. In focus beams. As if it is looking at something. Or looking for something. There is a question that haunts this story, and it haunts it most in this moment. What were the lights doing? If they were natural phenomena, ball lightning, plasma, some unusual atmospheric effect, they would have no purpose. They would simply exist, as weather exists, without intention. If they were secret military aircraft, experimental technology, black-budget programs, something neither the American nor British governments wish to acknowledge, they would have a purpose, but one defined by human objectives. Surveillance, perhaps. Testing. Provocation. But the behavior described, the focus beams, the apparent responsiveness to the presence of observers, the fragmentation and reassembly, does not fit cleanly into either category. It fits most naturally into a third category, which is also the most uncomfortable one. Intelligence. Awareness. Intent. I want to be careful here. The Midnight Drift is not a channel for conclusions. We do not know what was in Rendlesham Forest. We may never know. What we can do, what we are doing now, in the quiet of your evening, is sit with the facts as they are, and allow them their full weight, without rushing to resolve them. The facts are these. A senior military officer, on duty, went into a forest and recorded what he saw. His voice is on tape. The tape has been authenticated. The events he described, the radiation, the physical traces, the lights, were corroborated by multiple witnesses. The official British Ministry of Defence file on the incident, released in 2009, runs to over 400 pages. 400 pages. For something that, in the official conclusion, was determined to pose no threat to national security and could be explained by conventional means. 400 pages of something that poses no threat and can be explained. The lights, eventually, moved away. They drifted north, toward the coast, toward the sea. And then they were gone, and the forest was dark again, and Charles Holt clicked off his recorder, and the night was over. He went back to the base. He wrote his report. He sent it up the chain of command. The report, later known as the Holt Memo, was classified. And then, years later, declassified. And what it says, in the flat language of military bureaucracy, is extraordinary. It says that personnel from RAF Bentwaters observed a metallic triangular object in the forest. That it had a red light, pulsing, at its apex. That it illuminated the entire clearing. That it maneuvered through the trees without making contact with them. That it returned the following night. That beams of light were directed at the ground and at the base itself. It says all of this in the language of an official memo. Matter of fact. Typed. Signed by a lieutenant colonel. Let the forest be quiet. Outside your window, the night is doing what it does. The stars are turning. The air is still. And somewhere on the Suffolk coast of England, the pine forest of Rendlesham stands as it has always stood, cool and dark and patient. Something visited it once. Or perhaps more than once. Or perhaps it visits still, in the hours when no one is watching. We do not know. Sleep is coming for you, if you let it. Do not resist. The world will still be here in the morning. The questions will still be here. The forest will still be here. There is nothing you need to solve tonight. After the forest comes the paperwork. This is where most mysteries end up, eventually, in archives. In filing systems. In boxes that sit for decades in government storage until someone files a request, and a clerk pulls them out, and the past blinks in the fluorescent light. The Rendlesham Forest Incident generated an extraordinary quantity of paper. Some of it appeared quickly. Some of it took years. Some of it has still not been fully released. And the documents that have emerged, taken together, tell a story that is more complicated than either true believers or committed skeptics usually acknowledge. Let us start with what was said officially, in the days and weeks immediately following the incident. The British Ministry of Defence was informed of the events at Rendlesham almost immediately. The American forces at the base were guests on British soil. After all, an unusual event involving military personnel required coordination. A senior RAF officer, Squadron Leader Donald Morland, was stationed at the base as a liaison. He knew what had happened. The MOD's response, in the immediate aftermath, was to classify the incident and move on. No formal investigation was launched. No teams were sent to the forest. No scientists were consulted. The official position, articulated quietly and without fanfare, was that the incident posed no threat to national security. That position has been repeated, in various forms, for more than 40 years. The Holt Memo, the official report filed by Lieutenant Colonel Holt, was sent to the Ministry of Defence shortly after the incident. It sat in the files, classified, until 1983, when an American researcher named Robert Todd filed a Freedom of Information request. The memo was released. And when it became public, it changed the nature of the conversation. Here was not a fringe account, not a tabloid claim, not an anonymous witness speaking to a UFO magazine. Here was a document on official letterhead, signed by a deputy base commander, describing events that, in any ordinary context, would be extraordinary. The memo is brief. A single page, roughly. It describes, in dry military prose, a metallic triangular craft in the forest, radiation readings, physical trace evidence, and lights that returned on subsequent nights. It ends, and this ending is worth pausing on, with the observation that the lights appeared to aim beams toward the ground and toward the base. Beams directed toward a NATO air base. In 2009, the Ministry of Defense released a large tranche of documents related to UFO sightings in the UK, including its complete file on the Rendlesham incident. The file runs, as I mentioned, to more than 400 pages. What does 400 pages of official documentation look like for an event the government says poses no threat and can be explained? It looks like correspondence, memos, transcripts, scientific reports, letters from witnesses, letters from researchers, assessments, reassessments, notes from officials asking, carefully and in bureaucratic language, what exactly happened in that forest. None of the documents contain a definitive answer. All of them take the question seriously. There is a letter in the file from Nick Pope, who worked for the Ministry of Defense for more than 2 decades, specifically in the branch that handled UFO reports. He became, over the years, one of the most credible and careful public voices on the subject. Pope has said, in interviews and public statements, that the Rendlesham case troubled him more than almost any other he investigated. Not because of any single piece of evidence, but because of the weight of evidence in aggregate. The number of credible witnesses, the physical trace evidence, the radiation readings, the Holt recording, the official documentation. Taken separately, he has said, any one of these could perhaps be explained. Taken together, they resist explanation. Let me tell you about the skeptical explanations, because they deserve to be heard. They have been offered seriously, by serious people, and they are not without merit. The most popular skeptical explanation involves a lighthouse. About 5 miles from Rendlesham Forest stands Orford Ness, a shingle spit that juts into the North Sea. On that spit, there is a lighthouse, the Orford Ness Lighthouse, that rotates and sends its beam out to sea. The skeptical argument holds that the lights the military personnel saw in the forest were reflections or refractions of this lighthouse beam, magnified or distorted by the atmospheric conditions of that particular winter night. Charles Holt, when presented with this explanation, was not impressed. He had been in the military for decades. He was familiar with lighthouses. He could see, from certain points in the forest, the Orford Ness light on the horizon. He knew what it looked like. What he saw in the forest on the night of the 28th, he said, was not a lighthouse. A second skeptical explanation involves a meteor. There was, in fact, a bright meteor recorded over southern England on the night of December 25th, the same night as the first Rendlesham encounter. Some researchers have argued that the initial sighting, by Burroughs and his companions, was a meteor, that they saw it fall in the direction of the forest and went to investigate, and that what they found in the forest afterward was colored by expectation and adrenaline. It is a reasonable hypothesis. Meteors can produce dramatic visual effects. A bright fireball, descending toward a forest at 3 in the morning, might easily be mistaken, in the first confused moments, for something else. The problem is the detail. The triangular object. The symbols on the hull. The radiation readings. The physical indentations in the earth. The return of the lights on the following nights. The Holt recording. Meteors do not return. Meteors do not send focus beams to the ground. There is a third explanation, less often discussed publicly but considered seriously by some researchers. It is the explanation that the event was real, but human in origin. That what the personnel at Rendlesham saw was experimental technology, secret aircraft, perhaps. or some classified test of new propulsion or lighting systems being conducted by either the American or British military, or both, in the forest near the base. This explanation has a certain attraction. It resolves the physical evidence, the craft, the lights, the radiation, without requiring anything supernatural or extraterrestrial. It explains the secrecy, the official evasion, the documents that were classified and slowly released. Governments classify things they do not want adversaries to know about. Experimental aircraft programs are among the most classified things that exist. But it has its own problems. If this was a secret military test, it was conducted dangerously close to a NATO base, in a way that caused significant alarm among trained military personnel. It left traces, radiation, physical marks, that were formally documented. And if it was American technology, why were the American military personnel at the base apparently unaware of it? Why was the deputy base commander standing in a field in the middle of the night, recording his confusion onto a handheld tape recorder? The documents do not resolve these questions. They add to them. And that, perhaps, is the most unsettling thing about the paper trail, not that it proves something impossible, but that it demonstrates, in the flat language of officialdom, that the people responsible for investigating these events were also unable to explain them. 400 pages. No conclusion. Let me pause here and speak to you for a moment about the weight of not knowing. We live in an age that is uncomfortable with unresolved questions. The internet offers an answer to almost anything, or at least the appearance of an answer. The pressure to conclude, to decide, to take a position and defend it, is immense. But some questions are not meant to be resolved quickly. Some questions are meant to be held, turned over slowly, examined from different angles on different evenings, in different states of tiredness and openness. The Rendlesham Forest Incident is one of those questions. It is not a puzzle with a missing piece. It is a mystery in the older sense, something that points toward the edge of what we understand, and asks us to stand there for a while and look. Outside your window, the night is settling. The world is quieter than it was an hour ago. Your body is heavier. Your thoughts are moving more slowly. This is the way sleep comes. Not as a wall, but as a tide. Gradual. Patient. Let it come. After the documents, comes the silence. Not immediately. Not quickly. But over years, and then decades, the Rendlesham Forest Incident settled into a particular kind of silence, the silence of things that cannot be explained, that have been examined and debated and written about and filmed and broadcast, and that remain, at their center, unchanged. The lights did not return after December 1980. Or if they did, they were not reported. Or if they were reported, the reports were not made public. The men who were there grew older. John Burroughs continued to serve in the Air Force. He became, as I said, one of the most careful and measured voices in any discussion of what happened. He sought, for decades, to have his medical records released, records related to his time in the forest, which he believed had been withheld. In 2015, he succeeded. The U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs finally acknowledged his medical claims related to the incident. They did not specify what had caused his health issues, but they acknowledged them. In the formal language of the federal government, they acknowledged that something had happened to him in that forest. Jim Penniston, who touched the craft, who felt its surface, who drew its symbols in his notebook, became one of the most publicly vocal witnesses. He has given interviews over many years. He has spoken to journalists, to researchers, to members of Congress. He has described his experience in detail that has never significantly changed, the mark of a genuine memory, as opposed to a constructed narrative. He still has the notebook. The symbols are still there, drawn by a young sergeant's hand on a cold December night, in a forest in Suffolk, 44 years ago. Charles Holt retired from the Air Force as a colonel. He has given his account publicly, repeatedly, and consistently. He has stated clearly, more clearly than either Burroughs or Penniston, in some ways, that what he witnessed that night was not any known human technology, and not any natural phenomenon he is aware of. He has signed affidavits to this effect. He has testified before informal congressional panels. He has offered his audio recording, freely, to any serious researcher who wishes to analyze it. He is in his 80s now. He has not changed his account. In 2023, a former American intelligence officer named David Grush testified before the United States Congress. He said, under oath, with legal protections for whistleblowers, that the US government had, for decades, been in possession of non-human technology. That programs existed, beyond normal oversight, to study and reverse engineer that technology. That people had been harmed, and in some cases killed, to protect these programs from public disclosure. The testimony was extraordinary. It was reported around the world. And then, as these things do, it settled into the background, another piece of a very large, very old, very unresolved story. Rendlesham was not mentioned specifically. But it did not need to be. Let me tell you about the forest as it is now. Rendlesham Forest still exists. It is managed by the Forestry Commission and is open to the public. There are walking trails. There are picnic areas. On weekends, families walk among the pines. And there is a trail, a specific trail, called the UFO Trail. It is marked on maps. It has information boards describing the 1980 incident. There are sculptures of spaceships. There is a replica of a landing mark, pressed into the earth as a tourist attraction. The forest has embraced its story. It has made something gentle and walkable out of something that once frightened trained military men. There is something quietly poignant about that. The place where something extraordinary may have happened has become a place for ordinary Sundays. For children pointing at sculpted spacecraft. For dogs running between the pines. For families eating sandwiches at wooden tables. Life is like that. It continues. It grows over the top of its mysteries. It builds picnic tables where there were once radiation readings. And the forest stands, as it has always stood, patient and dark and full of its own long silence. I want to say something, near the end of this, about what mystery is for. We sometimes treat unsolved things as problems. Failures. Gaps in the body of human knowledge that will eventually be filled if we work hard enough and gather enough data. And perhaps that is true of some mysteries. Perhaps one day someone will produce documentation, or technology, or a confession, that closes the Rendlesham case definitively. Perhaps. But I think there is another function to mystery, and it is a quieter one. Mystery is a reminder. A reminder that the universe is larger than our maps of it. That the boundary of the known is not the boundary of the real. That humility is not a failure of intellect but a correct response to the size of what we do not understand. The lights in Rendlesham Forest, whatever they were, did something that the most sophisticated human technology had, at that point, never managed to do. They went somewhere we couldn't follow. And they left no forwarding address. There is something in that worth sitting with. Not as frustration, not as invitation to speculation, but as rest. The not knowing is not your problem to solve. It belongs to the universe, which has been holding it for a long time and shows no sign of distress. You can put it down for the night. You can put everything down for the night. The forest is dark now. The pines stand in their rows, as they have always stood, in the cold air coming off the North Sea. Somewhere in the upper branches, a bird settles. The wind moves through the needles, barely a sound, more a sensation. The earth holds its indentations. The marks made on one December night, more than 40 years ago, are long since gone, erased by rain and frost and the steady work of roots and time. But the forest remembers, the way old places remember things, without language, in the texture of the soil and the lean of certain trees. Something was here. Something came from somewhere we cannot name, and rested for a little while among the pines, and then returned to wherever it came from. And the forest was left standing. And the men were left standing. And the night went on. You have been drifting for a while now. The words are arriving more slowly. The spaces between them are wider. This is right. This is exactly right. Let the questions go. They are patient. They have waited 40 years, they will wait another night. Let the forest be quiet. Let the lights, wherever they went, be far away. You are here, in the warmth, in the dark, on the edge of the oldest country in the world. Sleep. The midnight drift. Good night.